If you want to guarantee your next big project fails, there is this one surprisingly simple thing you can do.
Right. Just fall instantly, irrevocably in love with your very first idea.
Exactly. I mean, welcome to the deep dive, everybody. You know the feeling, right? You're facing some complex problem. Maybe you're sketching out a new business model, or you're finally sitting down to structure that massive presentation for work.
And suddenly, boom, this seemingly perfect solution just drops right into your lap.
Yeah, it feels clean. It feels elegant. You immediately just want to, like, stop brainstorming and start building.
And your brain is heavily incentivized to make you feel that way.
Yeah.
It rewards the speed of a solution. It often mistakes the ease of an idea for the actual quality of that idea.
Which is wild. And that distinction is exactly what we are pulling apart in today's deep dive. We're looking at the psychological pitfall of the first idea, and more importantly, we are exploring this really fascinating, honestly somewhat uncomfortable strategy used by Pixar to guarantee better ideas.
Right, a concrete tool to bypass your own cognitive biases.
Yeah, to force a higher level of creative output.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We have this great source material, and it starts with a deeply relatable story from an author that just perfectly illustrates the problem.
Oh, the waterfront property story. Yes, it's
Yeah.
such a perfect example of how blinding that first idea can be.
It really is.
Yeah.
So the author owns this stunning piece of real estate out on the eastern shore of Virginia. We're talking a sprawling 6-acre manicured lawn right on a bay.
Sounds terrible.
Right, complete nightmare. It has a house with a first floor tailor-made for entertaining and just a completely unobstructed, breathtaking view of the water.
And naturally, it's the kind of property that prompts unsolicited advice from literally every friend who visits.
Oh, constantly. They all tell him the exact same thing. You need to turn this into a wedding venue.
And he eventually agrees with them, right?
He does.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just casually entertain the thought. He dives in head first. He sits down and starts building out this highly specific mental model of the business.
Like the financial. Well, yes, but he's also way down in the granular details of the physical space. He's visualizing, where do the reception tents go? How does the catering flow work? What is the exact trajectory of the guests walking from the parking area?
Ah, I see. He is cognitively cementing the reality.
Yeah.
Before a single physical thing has even been altered.
Exactly. And the centerpiece of this entire vision is the ceremony location. He decides, with absolute certainty, that the ceremony just has to take place on one specific side of his house.
Why there?
Because there's this cluster of massive, gorgeous shade trees there. He figures it creates a perfectly framed, intimate view of the water. He thinks it could comfortably seat about, 200 to 250 guests.
It does sound nice, actually.
It does. And he gets so committed to this specific spot that he starts plotting out the construction of the arbor, the geometry of the seating arrangements, and get this, the exact trenches he is going to need to dig to run electrical power for the audio and lighting.
Wow. He's really out there mentally digging trenches for an idea he just had. Well, this is a textbook example of what psychologists call cognitive lock-in.
Cognitive lock-in.
Yeah. He has moved entirely past the phase of evaluating his idea and has just sprinted into the phase of executing it in his mind.
Right. So he takes this incredibly detailed, fully fleshed out plan, and he presents it to his wife, fully expecting, validation.
Uh-oh. I feel like I know where this is going.
Yeah, well, the author points out that his wife is a highly pragmatic, intelligent woman. She looks at the 6 acres, she looks at his highly specific shade tree plan, and she immediately identifies several glaring logistical nightmares.
Of course.
Furthermore, she looks at the rest of the vast property and just casually points out 2 or 3 alternative spots that are objectively better suited for the flow of a massive wedding.
And how did he take that?
He hated it. He absolutely hated it. He admits he became incredibly defensive. He dug his heels in, fought for his shade trees, and it resulted in all this unnecessary marital friction.
Which is so common. When our ideas are challenged, especially ones we've spent time, mentally furnishing, we rarely evaluate the feedback objectively.
Yeah, it took him a long, painful time to swallow his pride and admit that her alternative locations were vastly superior. His brilliant first idea was actually a trap limiting the potential of the whole property.
Well, and this narrative perfectly encapsulates a recognized psychological phenomenon. It's known as the creative cliff illusion.
The creative cliff illusion. Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that. What is happening in our brains there?
Basically, it's this pervasive false belief that our creativity just drops off a steep cliff immediately following our first significant burst of inspiration.
Oh, look, we only have one good shot at it.
Exactly. We have that initial aha moment, and we intuitively feel that this represents the peak of our creative capacity for this specific problem. We just assume any ideas generated after that initial spark will be like watered-down, forced variations of the original genius.
We treat creativity like a finite resource that just got tapped out.
Precisely. And the real danger of the creative cliff illusion is that the longer you focus on that initial concept, the less capable you become of perceiving alternatives.
Your brain just puts on blinders.
Literally. You stop being a problem solver and you transition into becoming a bodyguard for your creation.
Man, it's like, okay, think of it like deciding to build a house. And for whatever reason, the very first spot you pick is right on top of a sinkhole.
Okay, bad start.
Right, but you don't know it's a sinkhole yet. You just start building. You spend months agonizing over the perfect curtains, finding the right reclaimed wood for the floors, obsessing over the paint swatches.
You're completely invested.
Yes, you get so hyper-invested in the aesthetic details of this initial choice that when someone walks up and says, hey, the floor's sagging, you ignore them. You just refuse to look out the window at the perfectly solid bedrock sitting untouched on the other side of your lot because you've already bought the curtains for this specific room.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Right.
The danger of that sinkhole is that the longer you spend picking out the curtains, the harder it becomes to admit the foundation is fundamentally flawed.
Your ego gets wrapped up in it.
Completely, inextricably tied to the decorations. You are defending the sunk cost of your own mental energy.
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit, because I hear that and I look at, every business book and startup guru out there, and they all pound the same mantra into our heads. Ideas are a dime a dozen, execution is everything.
Sure, you hear that a lot.
So shouldn't we just pick an idea and execute? If we force ourselves to sit around drafting endless alternative floor plans, aren't we just falling into analysis paralysis? Isn't the author mapping out the electrical lines exactly what he's supposed to be doing?
That is where conventional wisdom really requires a much sharper lens. Yes, execution is the differentiator between a dream and a successful business.
Right.
But we habitually define execution way too narrowly. We view execution purely as the physical or logistical building of the thing. Digging the trenches, running the wires, launching the website. What that definition misses entirely is that making yourself come up with more ideas is actually a crucial form of execution.
Oh, interesting. So the stress testing of the foundation is part of the building process.
It is the most vital part. If you skip the cognitive stress test, your physical execution is just accelerating you toward a flawed outcome. And this brings us to how a massive animation studio handles this exact vulnerability.
Right, Pixar. This is the strategy introduced by Pixar co-founder Eda Kэтmella, as detailed in Дэвид Эпштейn's book, Inside the Box.
Yes, Kэтmella institutionalized a hard safeguard against the creative cliff illusion. It's widely known within the studio walls as the 3 pitches rule.
The 3 pitches rule.
It's elegant in its simplicity, but notoriously demanding in its actual application.
So the rule is, if you're a director at Pixar and you have a concept for a new film, you are strictly forbidden from walking into a room and pitching a single idea.
They will literally refuse to entertain the meeting.
That's wild. You are required, unconditionally, to fully develop and pitch 3 entirely distinct movie concepts. And we're not talking about, 3 variations of the same protagonist. These have to be 3 separate narrative worlds.
And the psychology driving this mandate is what makes it so effective. Kэтmella and the leadership at Pixar understand the creative cliff illusion deeply. They know that if a director spends 6 months developing one single idea for a film, that director is inevitably going to fall head over heels in love with it.
They've bought the curtains for the sinkhole.
Exactly. And when they bring that single idea into a pitch room, the dynamic immediately becomes adversarial. If the executives point out a structural flaw in the narrative, the director doesn't hear constructive feedback.
They hear an attack on their sole creative child.
Right. By mandating 3 pitches, Pixar forces a process Дэвид Эпштейн refers to as productive experimentation.
Productive experimentation. I love that term. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. It operates on the fundamental assumption that your first idea is merely a starting point, not the ceiling of your potential. By demanding 3 pitches, you bypass the emotional lock-in completely.
You mathematically cannot put all your ego into one basket because the rules dictate you have to weave 2 more baskets.
Right. And let's run a thought experiment and apply that Pixar rule directly back to the author with the waterfront property. If he had adopted the three pitches rule before talking to his wife, it completely reframes the history of that conflict.
He would have had to interrupt his own momentum.
Exactly. He looks at the shade trees, the light bulb goes off, and he says, okay, this is a very strong candidate, I see the vision. But instead of immediately pricing out electrical cables, he forces a hard stop.
The rule demands he survey the remaining 6 acres.
Yeah, and develop 2 entirely different logistical plans. So maybe Plan B utilizes the natural slope down to the water, and maybe Plan C focuses on the existing architecture of the patio. Think about the massive shift in his posture when he finally brings his wife into the conversation.
It's a completely different conversation.
Completely. He isn't walking in saying, behold my masterpiece, please validate my genius. He is walking in saying, hey, I've mapped out 3 distinct approaches to utilizing this property. Let's analyze the friction points of each.
He sidesteps the marital discord entirely.
Because his self-worth is distributed across the exploration of the property rather than tied to those specific shade truths.
What's fascinating here is how the 3 pitches rule transforms you from an advocate into an explorer.
Yeah.
It shifts your baseline psychological stance from being defensive to being genuinely curious.
But, mandating 3 pitches is relatively straightforward when you are a studio executive managing $1 billion budget.
Yeah.
The real practical question is how an individual, someone sitting alone at their desk right now, writing code, drafting a legal brief, or starting a side hustle, how do they force themselves to bypass their own ego when there's no executive board demanding alternatives?
And this is where Дэвид Epstein's personal application of the rule provides a brilliant blueprint. He didn't just write about the Pixar strategy in his book, he actually weaponized it against his own writing process.
Yes. And the discipline required for how he did it is just staggering to me. So Epstein is sitting alone at his computer, writing a chapter for Inside the Box. For every single chapter, he would write out the opening hook that came most naturally to his mind.
The fluent, intuitive starting point.
Yeah.
The path of least cognitive resistance.
Right. He would type it out, look at it, and then he would literally cross it out.
Just threw it away.
Threw it away, and forced himself to sit in that chair and generate 2 completely different conceptual openings from scratch.
The emotional friction of that act cannot be overstated. I mean, deleting perfectly competent work that you just created is entirely counter to our biological programming.
He admitted it was agonizing, but the data speaks for itself. Of the 12 chapters that make up the final published book, 9 of those chapters open with his second or third attempt.
9 out of 12. That represents a 75% failure rate for his initial instinct.
A 75% failure rate for the ideas that felt the most natural. Epstein had this major realization walking away from this. He realized that those first ideas, the ones that surface with such ease and clarity, weren't popping up because they were the right ideas.
No, they were popping up because they were the convenient ideas.
Right.
And this touches on the core mechanism of how our brains process information. Metabolically speaking, the brain is an energy-hoarding organ. It consumes a massive amount of calories, so it has evolved to solve puzzles as quickly as possible so it can power down.
Lazy brains.
Very lazy. When faced with a creative challenge, the brain scours its archives and just hands you the most accessible, easily retrieved pattern.
Because retrieving a familiar pattern burns fewer calories than forging a new one.
Exactly. The idea feels fluent. It feels frictionless. And the cognitive trap is that we consistently mistake that feeling of fluency for a guarantee of quality. We just assume that because the idea arrives smoothly, it must be brilliant.
Right. So what Epstein did, crossing out that fluent first idea, he refers to it as implementing a useful constraint. He was deliberately injecting what psychologists call a desirable difficulty into his workflow.
Useful constraints?
Yeah, and in this context, constraints aren't meant to hold you back. They exist to force that productive experimentation we talked about.
Because without the constraint, the brain will always take the highway.
Yes. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Think of it like lifting weights at the gym. If you only pick up the 5-pound dumbbell because it's convenient and easy, you are never going to build muscle.
You have to add weight.
Exactly. The constraint of a heavier weight is a desirable difficulty. It forces the muscle to adapt and grow.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know what people are thinking.
Go for it.
We are all operating under intense constraints of time and resources. Deadlines are looming, right? Inboxes are overflowing. To take perfectly viable work like Epstein writing a perfectly fine chapter introduction and intentionally throw it in the trash just to prove a point.
Yeah.
Isn't this just wildly inefficient.
It feels like a massive bottleneck, right?
It does. In the micro timeline of a single afternoon, yes, it feels staggeringly inefficient to generate ideas, you might discard.
Right.
But we have to evaluate efficiency on the macro timeline of the entire project. What is the true cost of inefficiency? Is it spending an extra 3 hours on a Tuesday mapping out 2 alternative marketing strategies? Or is it spending 6 months executing a strategy built on a fundamentally flawed premise?
Only to have to tear the whole apparatus down when reality exposes the sinkhole.
Exactly. The perceived efficiency of sprinting with the first idea is actually a massive liability masquerading as productivity.
Wow. Okay, that makes so much sense.
And furthermore, the framing of throwing away the work is often inaccurate anyway. When you develop 3 distinct pitches, you rarely discard 2 completely to champion one.
Oh, wait, really? You don't just pick one and burn the others?
Seldom. What usually happens is a process of synthesis. You evaluate the 3 robust options, and you begin to see the unique strengths in each. The final, polished outcome becomes an amalgamation.
So you harvest the best parts.
Yeah, you take the emotional resonance from pitch 1, the logistical elegance from pitch 2, and the innovative hook from pitch 3. You weave them together into a final product that is exponentially stronger and more nuanced than any single initial thought could ever be.
That's a great point. You aren't wasting time building 3 separate houses. You're just giving yourself a significantly richer inventory of materials before you pour the final foundation.
You expand your own menu of possibilities.
All right, so as we distill all of these sources down for you, the immediate practical takeaway for your daily life is this. Tomorrow morning, when that light bulb goes off, whether you are prepping for a board meeting, starting a side hustle, or just trying to figure out how to reorganize your chaotic garage, capture that idea. Write down that glowing first thought in all its fluent glory.
And then you have to possess the discipline to draw a hard line underneath it.
Draw the line. Establish the useful constraint. Force yourself to create 2 more entirely distinct approaches to the problem. Flesh them out with the exact same level of rigor and detail as the first.
You might ultimately decide that your first instinct was the most sound, but when you return to it, you will be proceeding with the absolute certainty that it is the best option, not just the most convenient one.
Or you might realize your third idea completely changes the game. And there is a final, profound secondary benefit to making this a habit, right? The source material points to this as perhaps the ultimate hidden benefit of the Pixar model.
Yeah, systematically forcing yourself to generate alternatives acts as an acid wash for your defensive ego. When you only arrive with one idea, your personal identity and your professional competence become entirely wrapped up in its success.
Any critique registers as a personal attack.
Right, you are defending your own intelligence. But when you intentionally arrive with 3 distinct ideas, you are implicitly communicating something very powerful to yourself and to the room. I do not have all the answers, and I am prioritizing the best outcome over my initial instinct.
By detaching your self-worth from a single output, you strip away the armor.
You become far more willing to listen to feedback from people who are smarter than you, people who might see the blind spots you missed.
You transition from being a fragile creator protecting a single baby to a robust collaborator trying to map the best route forward.
It radically alters how you interact with colleagues, with clients, and as the author of our first story learned the hard way, with your own family.
It's a fundamental rewiring of how you approach problem solving. So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this time exploring how our brains are biologically wired to take the path of least resistance, to grab that first convenient idea and hold on tight to conserve energy and avoid the desirable difficulty of true exploration.
It is our default biological setting.
Right. So, if that is our default setting in our professional projects and creative endeavors, how much of our broader everyday lives are currently being dictated by the creative cliff illusion?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Are we living a first draft life? Are you operating within a first draft career, maintaining a first draft daily routine, or living in a first draft city simply because you never forced yourself through the friction of pitching 2 viable alternatives?
A deeply necessary question to examine.
Don't let the convenience of your first idea blind you to the potential of the rest of the map. Build the useful constraint. Force the friction. Pitch the alternatives. Thanks for exploring the sources with us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.